Welcome, everyone. My name is Maude Lafontaine. I'm a registered dietitian. I work with people living with type 1 diabetes, and today I have the honor to present you on managing restaurant meals with type 1 diabetes. So let's dive into it because we have a busy schedule and I want to make sure I cover everything in the hour that we have. So if ever you have any questions, the way my brain works is that it prefers that you put your questions, but that I answer at the end. So this way I'm not, I'm able to focus on the presentation. So what are scheduled today? So first I'm going to talk about carb counting at the restaurants, how we can adapt the carb counting outside of the house. Then I'm going to talk about understanding how the food impacts your blood sugar, because you all know that it's not just the carb counting, it's also considering all the other food and nutrients that will also affect the blood sugar. And then we're going to talk about strategies to really better manage those restaurant meals. So first, counting the carbs at the restaurant. So I always tell people that when you go to the restaurant, please do not bring your measuring cups and spoon. Do not put your food scales in your purse. We're going to find other ways to figure out the carb content, the serving size, and the carb content of the food you're about to eat. So carb counting, let's be honest, it is very difficult, especially when we're trying to count the carbs in mixed meals or restaurant meals where we don't know how it's done, what's the ingredients. So it's very tricky. I like to remind people that there's 20% margin of error. So Health Canada accepts a 20% margin of error on a food label. So this means that even if you have a food label, there's 20% margin of error. So if you go to the restaurant, you try your best, you don't have necessarily a food label attached to that meal, it's normal that you're gonna probably have a bit more, a bigger margin of error. And so it's not to, why I say this, it's just to remove the pressure from your shoulder to be perfect. Also, it kind of brings me to what I call the law of small numbers. So of course, if you eat more carbs, chances are you're going to have a harder time to figure out the right amount of carbs and the right amount of insulin to give for that meal. So for example, if you eat 100 grams of carbs, considering 20% margin of error, maybe it's more like around 120. So chances are the amount of insulin will be a bit more difficult to calculate compared to if you eat, let's say, 50 grams, then we have maybe a 10-gram difference. Of course, luckily, the technology reduces the need for precision. So when we think about, let's say, automatic modes now that are coming on the market, it really helps because the algorithm will request either basal adjustments or bolus for a correction bolus. So this really reduces the need for precision, and hopefully at some point we wouldn't even have to count the carbs with this type of technology. But all that being said, I think what's really important is to remember ourselves that when you go to the restaurant, it's something special. It's something that's supposed to be fun, and we really want to do our best, but still keep the notion of pleasure around food. So first of all, you want to determine the serving size when you're eating out. And like I said, you're not going to bring your measuring cups, you're not going to bring your food scale. And for all the non-standard restaurant portion sizes, you can use your hand because you always have your hands with you, which is going to be convenient. So let's say you go to a fast food restaurant chain, you're like, usually the portions are pretty standard. So when they say that's a small fries. Often you have also the nutritional information, so you don't have to measure. But let's say if you go to a restaurant where it's not standard portions, then that could be very useful. So usually I say an adult fist is around a cup, so 250 ml. You would have to measure specifically with your fist, but usually this is what it looks like. The tip of your thumb, for me, this is around a teaspoon, so 5 ml, or this is as it's a 1-inch thick. And then also the folded index finger or the full thumb would be around 15 ml, so a tablespoon. And then the length of the hand, from the wrist to the tip of your finger, is usually 7 to 8 inches. If you want to measure, let's say, a slice of pizza or whatever, then it could be useful if it tells you that the slice of pizza is X amount of inch. Then once you found out the serving size, you want to know the amount of carbs for that serving size. So there's different options. So first, nutritional values. Some of them are available at the restaurants. So you can ask for them or on their website. So if you know that you're going to go somewhere and that the nutritional value is available, that's very reassuring for you. If you don't have the nutritional values at the restaurant or on their websites, so usually when we think about, again, more like a non-chain type of restaurant, then you're going to have, what I suggest is you can use a phone app. A phone app that I really like is called Nutrients Canada. The reason why I like it is that it's just a big database with a bunch of food, and then you search the food that you want and you can generate a food label. So pretty easy. And another reason why I like this phone app is that it's not going to ask you for your weight, your height, your weight goal, like do you want to lose weight, gain weight, maintain your weight. So again, type 1 diabetes brings a lot of focus on food, and I don't think we need to add extra focus on calories. So for that reason, I really like this phone app. It's just a simple phone app that will show you the carb content of the food that you have. I'm going to show you an example what it looks like. So for example, this is kind of the main index. So you can just search by food, so you just enter a word, anything. So for example, you're going to look for a bagel. If you're having a bagel with, let's say this one is cinnamon raisin, and you check, and then you look at a different format. You choose the serving size that better match what you're about to eat, and then it gives you a nutritional label. So very convenient. So for example, here, a small bagel, it gives you in centimeters. I think you have it in inch, but it gives you, let's say, carbs, 39 grams of carbs. You subtract the fiber, and it gives you the carb content. So pretty useful. And then another resource that I like is the Pocket Guide to Dining Out from Diabète Québec. So a bit similar. It's just the way kind of the menu, it's divided into types of cuisine. So let's say if you go to, I don't know, Asian restaurant, then you can just go in that section and find out what type of food is listed, and then you can figure out according to your serving size what's the carb content. I think it's available in a PDF version. I think Sarah will put the link, or I think there's printed version as well if you like to carry like more like a paper version of it. The goal is really to practice, right? It's to plan and to practice. So if you know you're going to go to the restaurant or you're going to eat out, what I suggest is that maybe you plan ahead, you do your research. So if possible, you try to look at the menu, you look at what you feel like you want to eat, and then knowing what you're planning to eat, then you can start right away to find some resources to find the carb content of those foods. To prepare in advance, to reduce your stress, and just make sure that you're going to enjoy more your time at the restaurant. Also, this is what I suggest for my teenagers. So when they want to start to eat at the cafeteria or want to start to eat out without their parents, we work on planning. So we could ask the menu at the cafeteria. And I suggest that with the parents, they look at what they're planning to eat. And let's say, for example, if they're like, oh, I'm going to eat at the cafeteria on the lasagna day, then okay, you can look at the, let's say, the phone app, go search for lasagna, and then you can say, okay, well, here you can see for every a cup of lasagna, this is how many grams of carbs it's going to provide. So at the cafeteria, the teenager can just look, compare to his fist, and then calculate the carb content accordingly. It's not perfect. It's not, let's say, necessarily the same lasagna, same ingredients, but again, we're comparing stuff that are similar. We're not comparing lasagna to a food label for a broccoli. We're trying to compare stuff that are similar. So chances are you're pretty much going to be around what it looks like. But again, we know that it's not just a matter of carb counting. It's also considering what are the other nutrients are in that plate or in that meal, and adjusting insulin accordingly, because you can have two meals that provide you with the same amount of carbs, but the combination of those meals can make your blood sugar react completely differently. This is what we're going to talk about. So before we dive into what a restaurant meal looks like, I would like to kind of remind you how when you eat more what we call a kind of a balanced meals, right? So having like around a quarter of your plate filled with whole grain or starchy food, a quarter of your plate with protein, and close to half of your plate with vegetable. So this meal usually is balanced with carbs, but also protein and fiber. So this type of meal, the way it is digested and the way it impacts your blood sugar, it's going to be pretty consistent to the way that your regular insulin, your rapid acting insulin works. So just as a reminder, when you inject your rapid acting insulin, it takes 15 to 20 minutes to start working, so to start rising the mountain, then it reaches its peaks of action. So when it starts to work more like to the optimal level, around 1.5 to 2 hours after the injections, and then it fades slowly away to finish 3 to 4 hours later. So this insulin with a balanced meal, usually we see like that it's going to work kind of perfectly. But a little reminder that when you eat at the restaurant meals equal larger serving size, more carbs, more protein, more fat. So it looks more like this. So when we look at those type of meals, we're going to have usually higher fat, higher protein meals combined with carbs. So let's say when we think about the pizza. So what it looks like is that if you give your regular insulin, the action of your rapid acting insulin doesn't change. So it's going to be the same action, but the way you're going to digest that food, that higher fat and protein food, is going to be different than a balanced meal. So usually what we see is that the fat makes slow down the digestion process. So usually we're going to see that the carbs are going to be absorbed a little bit slower. So that's why we may see a risk of low blood sugar 1 to 2 hours after the beginning of the meal, because the insulin peaks, but then all the carbs are not absorbed in the blood yet. And then usually also we see that fat increases what it's called, it causes insulin resistance. So for anybody, like diabetes or not, if you don't have diabetes, usually you're going to produce more insulin to manage a higher fat meal because of that resistance, because it means that your insulin has a harder time to manage those carbs when there's fat around. So usually you're going to need more insulin. Also, the protein will be converted into glucose after 4 or 5 hours. So those two combined makes you usually makes you require more insulin to manage that meal. Otherwise, there's a risk of hyperglycemia 3 to 6 hours later after that meal, a persistent hyperglycemia hours after you eat that meal. So this is what a restaurant will look like. However, first thing, you need to assess your own blood sugar trend, right? So what I recommend, even before changing anything, you need to act like a detective. So you need to monitor, you need to look at your blood sugar trend. So yes, it asks you to really check more often. You can set alarms or CGM reminders to make sure you really kind of monitor how it impacts your blood sugar. If you really want to make sure you understand how that challenging meal affects your blood sugar and find strategies to manage it. Do not judge that blood sugar nor your meal. Okay, it's fast, it's numbered. Try to be detached by those numbers, and then just see them as great information to make decision. If you eat a meal once, it's going to be difficult to really assess a trend. So that's why I usually also recommend to eat that same meal again, let's say as like the next day as leftovers, or maybe you can have your homework to just say, okay, I'm going to eat pizza this Friday, and then Friday night, like next Friday, I'm going to eat it again, to try to tweak, to assess a bit more my pattern and eventually tweak my management. And really see those mistakes or high or low blood sugars as learning opportunities to really improve your management. Just checking the time. Okay. Then let's dig into strategies. So there's two categories, I would say. So strategies around adjusting insulin and strategies around nutrition. So looking at insulin, so what we learn is that this typical high fat, high protein meal usually causes hyperglycemia later on. So usually we're going to need to increase the insulin dose. Whoa, a lie. Okay. So unfortunately, the slide hides the graphs, but what you would see is that when you have this combination of high fat and high protein, you're going to see that persistent higher blood sugar. If you just have high fat or high protein, so not combined, but just one of them, you're going to see that blood sugar will not be as high, but it's actually going to be helpful. It's going to prevent actually probably a low blood sugar later on. So it's usually why I recommend also to have protein, let's say with a meal or with a snack, with the carbs, because not only sustain your appetite, but it also sustains your blood sugar. Keep it more steady, more stable. So it's actually a good thing. But it's really the combination of the fat and the protein that really keeps the blood sugar higher long after that meal. However, this will be different from one person to the other. And knowing that your blood sugar is going to remain probably high later on, you're not so sure how much extra insulin you can give, you can just start with a 10% increase. And then just keep in mind that probably you're going to need more. 10% is not that much, but you can start with 10% and then move on to maybe 20, 30, could reach up to 50%. Don't be surprised, but you can really go slowly according to your comfort level. So for example, if you calculate a carb bolus, so an amount of insulin for your carbs with, let's say, your ratio, and it's a total of 10 units. If you know that meal is higher in fat and protein, probably you're going to need more. So you could say, okay, maybe from that 10 units, I'm going to add an extra 10%. So the way you would do it, you would multiply 10 by 1.10, which will give you 11 units. If you want to do an extra, let's say 30%, it will be 10 units times 1.30, and then it's going to give you 13 units. So this is how it could work. Then increasing insulin, that's something we probably need. However, what's also probably going to be useful is to split that dose, because if you give more insulin but all at the beginning, could increase the risk of having a low blood sugar like we saw. So just a reminder that your insulin, when you give it, if you give more insulin like we just saw, probably you're just going to increase that risk of hypoglycemia 1 to 2 hours after. So that's why now we're going to talk about the strategy of not only increasing the dose, but splitting it. Just, oh, cool. Okay, it works. So for that graph, you see, so this study showed that people on injections, so bear with me, I'm going to guide you through that graph. So what they saw is that they gave consistent amount of carbs and protein for that meal, which is quite like a regular with a fair amount of protein, but then they changed the amount of fat. So when there was low fat, you could see that in blue, blood sugar was rising, and then blood sugar was kind of steady, like we would normally see with a regular meal. But then when we were giving the same amount of insulin of that low fat, but for a high fat meal, we could see that blood sugar was also trending up and then going down, but remaining high hours after that injections. So that's why they said probably the person needs more. So they went with a dose of 130%. And what they did is they tried to give that 130% dose all at once at the beginning. So we could see that in green, blood sugar was lower following that meal, but then trending very low afterwards. And actually 60% of the participants were having a low blood sugar following that meal. So they say, okay, 130%, that's great, but let's try to split it. And the way they split the insulin was they gave 100% upfront, like a regular dose. So that's the line in red. So blood sugar went up, went down, and then they gave a second dose. So the extra 30%, they gave it around 3 hours later. And that helped to avoid that high blood sugar and without causing any low blood sugar. This is what you could see. Long story short, you're going to probably need more insulin here in that situation. 30% extra was kind of the key, but to split it and 100% upfront and 30% around 3 hours later. Now, could be a bit challenging, but when you think about it, technically you could simply, again, this is different from one person to the other, but you could simply do the strategy of counting your carbs, giving your regular bolus, giving your regular dose, and then saying, okay, let's check 2-3 hours later, and let's give a blood sugar correction. Maybe that's not going to be enough. Maybe that correction will not represent 30% extra from the previous bolus, but probably it's going to help. And then you're going to see maybe it helped, but it's not quite optimal. So maybe the next week you eat the pizza, you're going to be more comfortable saying, okay, I'm going to give a second dose, like a correction, but I'm going to probably add a bit of extra insulin. maybe try to be close as 30% or lower, again, according to your blood sugar trend. Just be careful, because also when we think about restaurant, we think about alcohol, risk of low blood sugar also associated with alcohol. So sometimes if your meal was higher in protein and in fat, but you also took alcohol, that's going to kind of cancel the need for extra insulin later on. So just be careful. It's also something to keep in mind. Very tricky and challenging. I agree. Now another study showed for those who are on the pump and use extended boluses, what they showed us is that kind of a combination that was very useful was to give at least 60% of insulin up front as a regular dose, and then give the extended boluses up to 70% over 2 hours. So yes, 60 plus 70 doesn't add up to 100%. As you can see, it's 130%. So again, that extra 30% seems to be the key. But the way you would do it with that pump and that extended bolus would be to give, again, we go back to our example of needing 10 units for our meal. We would give 6 units up front as a regular bolus, and then we would extend 7 units over 2 hours for a total of 13 units, which is, again, 130% of our calculated dose. This was really helping to reduce the hypoglycemia following the meal, and then the delayed hyperglycemia later on. But those who are on a pump and actually not quite comfortable using those extended bolus, no problem. You can just simply do like you would do on an injection. You can do just like the regular bolus, 100%, and then 30% around 3 hours later. That could be also an easier option if you're more comfortable with just having more bolus than using extended boluses. And finally, with the insulin, another strategies would be to give insulin 15 to 20 minutes before eating. We call this pre-bolusing. Why? Well, what we see is that actually the timing of your injection is just as important, if not more, than the carb calculation itself, right? The proper dose. So especially if you start your meal with a blood sugar above target, right? So target being around 4 to 8. So if you start your blood sugar above target, it's even more important to pre-bolus. And what you see here is a graph that shows different participants. In red are the participants that were pre-bolusing, meaning they were giving the insulin 20 minutes before eating. We could see that blood sugar rises less and then was quite stable actually, compared to the participants in blue and in green. So we see blue is they gave insulin right at the time they were eating. So blood sugar rises and then went back down. And in green, they actually ate and gave insulin 20 minutes after. Same thing, the blood sugar rise and then went back to target. But it's very surprising how similar this is. So you give your insulin just before eating or after, it doesn't make a big difference. But if you give your insulin 20 minutes before, this is really helpful. And again, especially when you're above target. And usually what I say is that, well, this is what we read in the literature, so it's not just me, but when your blood sugar is in target, you need to pre-bolus 15-20 minutes. Sometimes if your blood sugar is above target, you may even have to consider to bolus even like earlier than 20 minutes. And if you start your meal with a low blood sugar, then we want you to treat that low, wait until you're above 4, and then eat, give your insulin right when you're eating. because again, even if you eat pizza, yes, there's more protein, more fat, so we probably need more insulin, need to split the dose, but still that first dose of insulin, most likely you're going to need to pre-bolus because there's carbs in the dough, the pizza dough. There's carbs in probably things like fries, if you have French fries. So you still have carbs that are going to be absorbed. But most likely the majority of those carbs will be also absorbed a bit later, but you still have carbs that are going to be absorbed when you're going to start eating. However, I know that could be super scary to pre-bolus at the restaurant. So when we're talking about, like, let's say you go to a fast food restaurant, that's probably less scary because it's more predictable. Like, you're going to order, you know what you're going to order. You can look at the label on their website, for example, and you know you're going to get that food, that meal pretty fast. However, you go to a restaurant that is more, let's say, like a sit-in, you sit down, you don't have, like, it's not like a fast food restaurant. You don't know what's going to be served. You don't know if there's going to be delayed. So it could be a bit scary to inject before. So what I suggest sometimes is that you can ask or you can order a non-carb starter. So for example, a soup, like a vegetable soup, or more like a vegetable starter to bring with the meal. So this way you are gonna get the main meal with the starter. You're gonna be able to see what's in that main meal to really be able to assess the carb content, give your insulin when you receive it, and then you're going to start to eat your non-carb starter. So it's going to add some time between your injections and when you're going to start to eat those carbs from the main meal. So that could be an option. So at least everything is served. You know, when you give your insulin, your meal is there. It could be a bit colder, but at least it's there. Last, strategies around nutrition. Right? So with nutrition, I often talk about strategies and to use nutrition as your ally to really help to reduce this glycemic impact. So either by maybe like the law of small number, trying to reduce those carbs without feeling frustrated or limited, or also maybe try to rebalance that meal to have a meal that looks like more like this balanced meal than this high fat, high protein meal. Okay, it's very personal. I think there's tons of strategies, and it really depends like what you prefer. So keep that in mind. So for example, you can ask for a vegetable starter or a side dish, right? To make sure we can have more vegetable, more fiber to rebalance that meal a little bit. You can, if you feel comfortable, you can replace some of those starchy foods with vegetable and or protein, right? So you can ask, is it possible to add a bit more protein or just substitute some of those starchy food by vegetable or protein? If the person you're with agrees, you can share plates. I'm just thinking, like, let's say you want to eat pasta, but you know that it's just like it's going to be a big bowl of pasta, and you would have liked to balance it out with protein and or vegetable, then you can ask if they are open to share, let's say, this plate of pasta with maybe like a salad, like a meal salad or a protein or something, just going to make things easier to rebalance your meals. If you like, you can go with the low or no carb version. When I think about fast food restaurants, you can have maybe a diet version, the diet soft drink. Just again, reduce the total amount of carbs, makes it easier, still have that taste that you want without being frustrated. Also, another trick could be to have the sauces on the side, because sometimes there's a lot of sauce. Sauce could be made with lots of sugar, more fat, could also make, again, blood sugar more challenging to manage. So maybe ask if that sauce could be just put on the side, and then you could add the amount you want. And also, if your issue is more related to being able to figure out the serving size and the carb content, then a trick could be to have a second plate, just so that you can take from the main plate, you can portion it in your own plate to really be able to visually assess and measure by yourself the amount you're going to put in your plate according to what you want to eat. Again, many strategies. I think it could be individualized, and this is usually what I do with my families. In summary, what we talked about. So the more you can prepare in advance, the better it is, right? And it also just reduce your stress. That's the main goal, increase your confidence. Again, a big key is really to assess and monitor your own blood sugar trends, right? Because it's not because I talked about how the fat impacts the blood sugar in a certain way that it's necessarily going to apply to your blood sugars. So it's really important that you assess your blood sugar trend first, and then based on your observations, you can ask for support, but you can just try to optimize either the insulin or the nutrition. When we talk about optimizing insulin, we talked about probably giving more insulin when you have a high fat, high protein meals. 30% extra seems to be kind of the key. Another strategy was to split that dose, just to avoid that low blood sugar soon after, and then that persistent high later on. So split that dose. So either on injection or on the pump, we had different strategies. And then to pre-bolus that first injections, especially if your blood sugar was running a bit higher prior to that meal. And in terms of nutrition, then we talked about different strategies to lower that glycemic impact. So maybe to rebalance that meal a little to lower the carb load of that food, but still keep satisfaction and pleasure, because that's the first goal of going to the restaurant. And usually I talked about reviewing expectations. We know carb counting is super hard. Diabetes management is super hard. And on top of that, if we go to the restaurant where we have no control over what's served, then it could make it harder. So just review your expectation and just make sure like you keep it safe. And don't forget that a meal at a restaurant means having fun and go to see people, socialize with people. So that's the goal. Diabetes management is still important, but it needs to be balanced with also having fun and enjoying the moment. So that's it. I hope you enjoy that presentation. If ever you have any questions, you can let me know. If there's a question afterwards, pretty sure people can rely on me those questions. But that's it.